Hello, World Civ 107 class. Welcome to week 11. I just currently want to just say a few things. One, this is a hugely important section to understanding what is happening in the modern world because we're really talking about the background to the rise of China, which should be something that's on your radar to understand. And also, at the end of this, I will be covering a little bit about the background to the history of Hong Kong and something about just an analysis of how that relates to modern events. I did spend 3 months in Hong Kong and 2 months prior to the protests and then a month in the middle of them and observed from that perspective. And so I did participate in a podcast that discussed this. Although the podcast is a little bit more relaxed and informal, not as academic that I'm doing here, and you'll see when you listen to it. I hope you find it informative, especially as we kind of get into the middle of some of the more of the discussions taking place. But also, I'm covering the Vietnam War and Cambodia. And I also spent about 3 months in Cambodia in Siem Reap. I never made it to any other part of Cambodia. But the effects of the Khmer Rouge and what happened there is still very apparent and very tragic. Just the infrastructure and I don't know. It just seems to me that when I was in Cambodia, that they were still in desperately needing to recover from the trauma of what happened. And I also, you will notice in some of the documentary clips that something that maybe is really hard for a lot of folks to understand is that the United States actually supported the Khmer Rouge at the peak of at a time that they were war criminals. And so did China. And it was really because China and the United States were upset with Vietnam and the Vietnamese communists. So the one thing that I also want to just bring out is that just like all Europeans haven't always got along, by the way, World War I, World War II, hello, and all the wars before that, not everybody in Asia gets along, not everybody in Africa gets along in terms of geopolitical issues. In fact, most countries fight people that are closer to them and have cultures closer to them than not, right? Unless you're a global colonial power or an imperialist power. So those kind of tensions were there. And something that sometimes gets oversimplified about the Cold War is while it was mainly, a battle against socialist economies, Communist Party-led states, and the United States with regimes that were any kind of state that would be against that. There were also some power plays within communist countries that were based more on geopolitical and historic issues. In other words, China and Vietnam have had some historic tensions. This just goes back into their history. And the United States and other countries were able to play on those tensions. Even Russia and China. So when they had the Sino-Soviet split, when Nixon invites over Mao to come over and to make peace with China, it was really his goal, and it worked, was to divide the communist sphere and break and split up the two camps. So he playing on the traditional kind of geopolitical problems that were long before communism between China and Russia. And so what we really sometimes have to I just want you to look at all this history, is to not get hung up on ideology, to realize that governments, they may have ideologies, but what their commitments to those ideologies are is often really challenged when you look at the actions. So, you see the United States ideologically is always for democracy and is against dictatorships. And we have supported and continue to support many, many dictators that are based on geopolitical interests. So the ideologies, sometimes, you wonder, is it just to dupe us into this idea to rally us around something and then not be followed? Or is it something more complex than that? I'm not going to resolve this right here. I just want to point this out. And as we're going to learn, China has a communist party that has shifted the country into more or less a capitalist world, market systems mainly. And so how does that all work? Well, again, don't get hung up on the ideologies. Look at what's going on and on the ground. And I think this is where historians, where we often debate sometimes with political scientists and others that are experts at kind of knowing about, this is what Marxism is and this is what democracy is and blah, 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 blah. Okay, fine. But the historic realities of what regimes do compared to what they say is always more eye-opening than anything else. And so whether we're talking about ourselves or others. And so I think I'll say this. I can't remember if I mentioned this in one of my last announcements or a lecture, but I'll just kind of end it quickly to say that there was a Hungarian Marxist that I listened to. I can't remember his name, where he said that the one thing he realized when he defected from the Hungarian Soviet-occupied Soviet world, he leaves the world of communism and he comes over into the West, and he says everything that the Soviets said about the West and their propaganda was correct, and everything, all the propaganda that he heard in the West about the Soviet Union was correct. And all the propaganda that the West said about themselves and that the Soviets said about themselves was false. That was a very interesting, cynical look at it all. In any case, that's all I'm going to have to say for that for now. Last thing I just want to quickly say is World War II, I didn't cover the Holocaust against Jews as much as I would have liked. I didn't even talk about the treatment of Jehovah's Witnesses. I wanted to show a documentary on the Purple Triangles. And when I talked about in World War II, the Indian Army, I would have liked to have talked more about Africa's involvement in World War II, which is equally something that should be mentioned. The bottom line is there's a lot to cover. And what I'm hoping is that you're learning in this class that history is much more complex than what we get spoon-fed out in our high school classes and what gets prioritized in our pop culture media like movies, okay? And so this is why you need to continue to be a life learner and realize that the world really is like popping full of so many different things that just were not on your radar. So that's all I'm going to say right there. Have a great week and contact me if you need anything.